When I started learning English on my own, it felt like standing at the base of a towering mountain, looking up at the peak hidden in the clouds. I didn't have a teacher or a classroom to guide me, just a strong desire to learn, a heap of curiosity, and a lot of time on my hands. Looking back now, I can say that the journey was both challenging and rewarding in ways I could never have imagined. Let me share with you how I made it happen, one step at a time. It all began with a simple goal. I wanted to understand the songs and movies I loved so much. Growing up, I listened to a lot of English music, from pop hits to soulful ballads. But the lyrics were always a mystery to me. I could hum along to the tunes, but I had no idea what the singers were actually saying. The same went for movies. I enjoyed the visuals and the action, but I had to rely on subtitles to follow the story. I wanted to change that. The first thing I did was start with the basics, building my vocabulary. I didn't have access to fancy apps or textbooks at the time, so I relied on an old English dictionary that had been lying around the house. Every day, I would pick 5 new words to learn. I wrote them down in a small notebook along with their meanings, and I practiced using them in sentences. At first, my sentences were simple and clumsy, but I didn't mind. I knew that every attempt brought me a little closer to fluency. Reading was another big part of my early learning process. I started with children's books because the language was simple and easy to understand. I remember reading The Little Prince and being thrilled every time I recognized a word I had just learned. I would underline unfamiliar words and look them up in my trusty dictionary. Over time, I graduated to reading short stories and articles online. It was slow work, but it felt like solving a puzzle, and I loved the sense of accomplishment that came with finishing a piece of text. Listening was a whole other challenge. At first, the rapid pace of native speakers was overwhelming. The words blended together, and I could barely catch anything. But I didn't give up. I started by listening to songs and following along with the lyrics. I would replay each line until I could understand and mimic the pronunciation. Pop songs became my favorite teachers. They were catchy, repetitive, and filled with useful phrases. Once I felt more confident, I moved on to podcasts and YouTube videos. I discovered a channel where a cheerful English teacher explained grammar and vocabulary in a fun and engaging way. Her lessons felt like conversations, and I learned a lot without even realizing it. I also found videos on topics I was interested in, like cooking and travel. Watching these videos didn't just improve my English, it also made the learning process enjoyable. Speaking, however, was the hardest part. Since I was learning alone, I didn't have anyone to practice with. At first, I felt silly talking to myself, but I quickly realized it was the best way to improve. I would stand in front of a mirror and practice introducing myself, describing my day, or talking about my favorite things. I pretended I was having a conversation with a friend. It felt awkward at first, but with time, I grew more comfortable hearing my own voice in English. One day, I discovered a language exchange app where I could chat with people from around the world. I was nervous about making mistakes, but the people I spoke with were kind and encouraging. They didn't laugh when I stumbled over my words or used the wrong tense. Instead, they gently corrected me and helped me improve. These conversations gave me the confidence to keep going and reminded me that learning a language is about connection, not perfection. Writing was another skill I worked hard to develop. I started by keeping a simple journal in English. Every night, I would write a few sentences about my day. At first, my entries were short and basic, things like, "Today was sunny," or "I ate noodles for lunch." But as my vocabulary grew, so did my ability to express myself. I started writing longer paragraphs, describing my thoughts and feelings in more detail. Eventually, I worked up the courage to post short essays on language learning forums. The feedback I received from other learners and native speakers helped me improve even further. As I became more comfortable with the language, I realized that learning English was about more than just words and grammar. It was about understanding the culture behind the language. I started watching English language movies and TV shows without subtitles. At first, it was hard to keep up, but I paused and replayed scenes until I understood them. I learned about idioms, slang, and expressions that weren't in my dictionary, but were essential for real-life conversations. I even picked up some humor, which made me feel more connected to the language. One of the most important lessons I learned along the way was the value of consistency. Learning English wasn't something I could master overnight. It required daily practice, even if it was just for 20 or 30 minutes. I made a habit of setting aside time each day to read, listen, write, or speak in English. Some days were harder than others, but I reminded myself that every little effort added up over time. Of course, there were moments of frustration. There were days when I felt stuck, when progress seemed slow, and I doubted whether I would ever become fluent. But during those times, I reminded myself why I started. I thought about the joy of understanding a song without needing to look up the lyrics or the excitement of watching a movie and catching every word. I thought about the conversations I could have with people from different parts of the world. These small victories kept me motivated. Eventually, my efforts started to pay off. I remember the first time I had a conversation with a native speaker and realized I could understand most of what they were saying. I remember the thrill of writing an essay entirely in English and receiving praise for it. I remember watching a movie and laughing at a joke without needing subtitles. These moments felt like reaching milestones on my journey, and they gave me the confidence to keep going. Looking back, I'm proud of how far I've come. Learning English alone wasn't easy, but it taught me resilience, discipline, and creativity. It showed me that with the right mindset and tools, I could achieve something I once thought was impossible. More importantly, it opened up a world of opportunities. Today, I can communicate with people from different countries, access information and resources in English, and express myself in ways I couldn't before. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone learning English alone, it's this: be patient with yourself. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. Celebrate the small wins, like learning a new word or understanding a sentence you couldn't before. Surround yourself with the language as much as possible through music, books, videos, and conversations. And most importantly, enjoy the process. Learning a language is not just about reaching a destination, it's about the journey, the growth, and the experiences along the way.